Hi and welcome everybody. I'm Rosemary Geddes, the Senior Marketing Manager for Progress across Asia, Pacific and Japan. I'm glad that you've been able to join us for today's webinar where we'll take you through the first of our two-part webinar series. Today's topic will walk us through 5 common website faux pas that you can solve with Sitefinity. We'll cover off key techniques for making your sites lightning fast, ways to make a content manager's life easier, and I'm confident you'll also pick up a few extra Sitefinity tips to add to your arsenal. Joining us today and who'll be walking us through all these tips and tricks is one of our key experts, Seth Cleaver. Seth is our Senior Sitefinity Technical Engineer for Australia and New Zealand, and I welcome him here today. Hi, Seth.
Hi, Rosemary. Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Seth. Before we dive in, I'll just quickly go through some housekeeping items for everyone on the line. Obviously, as you've joined, you've heard the voice tell you that you're all muted for today and you are in listen-only mode. We do plan on having a live Q&A at the end of this session, so at any point in time, please submit any questions that you have into the questions panel, which is to the right of your screen. I encourage you to raise these questions throughout the webinar as they come to mind, and we'll answer them towards the end. I'll hand it back over to you, Seth, and you can dive straight in.
Thanks, Rosemary. Okay, so more than likely there's a few of you who are on this call today who are in a position like me where you do a fair bit of business travel. In my experience, whenever you're on a business travel experience, you often do a lot of dinners with clients and then drinks after dinners, and so in my experience they can be pretty exhausting. And so I'm going to blame this little intro story on the fact that I was exhausted this particular day this incident happened. So I was coming home from Melbourne to Brisbane one evening on one of these business trips, and it had been a couple of days. I'd been out at client meetings at night and then answering emails in the evening after coming home from drinks, and so I was pretty tired. And as I sat down and made myself comfortable, there was a couple sitting next to me, and they were quite polite. They said hello, and so not wanting to be rude, I sort of asked them, are you returning to Brisbane or going to Brisbane, and is this business or pleasure? And so they sort of answered me, and as I sat down and figured out my array of entertainment equipment that I usually carry with me when I'm on plane flights, there wasn't long before something in the back of the man's chair caught my eye, and it was a long pole that was sort of folded up. It's kind of like a a tent pole that folds up into multiple pieces with a white ball on the end. And now I probably wasn't thinking too well, but my immediate reaction was this was sort of some sort of circus prop, and so I sort of asked the guy in a jovial tone, what's the baton for? Are you going to get up in the aisle mid-flight and show us some sort of trick or something? And fortunately, both the man and the woman were quite humoured by this, and between their fits of laughter, the man exclaimed, no, that's my walking cane, I'm legally blind. So faux pas. It's an embarrassing or tactless act or remark in a social situation, and that was probably one of the best faux pas you'll probably ever come across. In my role as a Sitefinity engineer, I come across a lot of opportunities to look at new websites, which I really enjoy because we've got great partners who do really good work, and it's always interesting to see what they come up with next. When a new agency comes on board as a Sitefinity partner, I also make it I take time to review their initial projects and provide them with some constructive feedback on how they could do the project perhaps, or address or attack the project differently next time. Occasionally, of course, I get the occasional help email, help us, as a customer or an agency is frustrated and they're trying to sort out some issue on their website which they just can't put their finger on. So today we are actually going to talk about the 5 most socially awkward website mistakes. Although I must admit that would probably be a fun presentation. In this particular context, I thought faux pas was an interesting word that could cover the 5 things that we're going to look at today, which are either consistently forgotten on websites, come up as issues in those situations that I just talked about, or could be done in different ways, and hopefully you can all take away something that might benefit you in your particular situation. To make this a little bit engaging today, we're going to turn this webinar into a little bit of a competition, and during the webinar you'll be asked to take a live poll after each of the faux pas. Your answers will remain anonymous to the audience, except the person who will be announced to be the most faux pas free, and Rosemary will send out a small prize to you. Now, some of these faux pas may seem super simple to you, but I promise you they happen a lot, and I would love your honest participation in the poll and how well you think you or your organisation fares when it comes to these 5 particular faux pas. We're going to be speaking to quite a diverse audience today, and so if a section of the presentation is a little bit too simple for you or a little bit too complex, because we will be diving into a little bit of developer code, just stick with us, because I'm sure we've got something that you can take away for your particular situation. So let's get into it. And the first faux pas is neglected page titles. This one seems really unimportant, but I assure you it's really critically important and often appears to get neglected during content entry time, and certainly doesn't get a lot of love in during development because it's probably, to be honest, enhancing the page title experience is probably beyond budget and time in most projects. We've often racing them out the door, and so I find that the page titles, such a little insignificant thing you would think, often gets neglected. And this example is one that I see pretty often, and I notice actually pretty quickly when I'm reviewing sites for the first time, and it's actually a really missed opportunity. Now, this particular site you see on screen, or page you see on screen at the moment, with the classic homepage title of home, is actually a Sitefinity site. I've actually scrubbed out or pixelated the web page to protect the guilty. But I do see this one a lot, home, about, they're classic ones that I see. So why are they so important? They're actually the second most important on-page factor after content for search engine optimization, according to experts, which is interesting. The title tag of a web page is meant to be an accurate and concise description of a page. Title tags are the major factor in helping search engines understand what your page is about, and they are often the first impression many people see or have of your page before they even get there, if they're looking at search results and things like that. Title tags are used in 3 key places: search engine results, the browser, and in social networks if the social tags are missing from your page structure. So, and last of all, I think I've mentioned that they're one of the first things that users see. So what makes up a good title tag? Well, the first one is title length. If your title is too long, and search engines may cut it off and adding an ellipsis at the end, and it could end up not displaying the important words that may lead to attracting your visitors. So keeping your titles concise is the best rule of thumb. Sometimes a good title that reflects the content, though, will be a little bit longer. There are actually no penalties for using a longer title, despite rumors that there is, but it's usually recommended to keep the important part of your titles under 60 characters, as this is what people will see in search results. But this depends greatly depending on character width and screen resolution and things like that. So you want those first 60 characters to really nab the audience and award you with the appropriate click-throughs. Remember, high bounce rates because of overly zealous page titles is not going to look great in your analytic reports, and it doesn't actually give you a lot of good vibes with the search engine algorithms either. Also, avoid capitals. Not only will it make you unpopular with your marketing manager, who I'm sure has deep personal convictions about casing, but it's difficult to read when skimming and can often feel demanding. Keep in mind that search engines won't always display the title that you provide in all cases. However, having a well-planned title that gives you the best shot at being in control. Second point is, don't overuse keywords. I see this quite a lot. While there is actually no penalty for long titles, stuffing your titles with keywords is not the best approach and can end up looking a little bit like a text-based version of a pushy salesperson. Placing the important keywords at the start of the title, but not in such a way that it appeals, but in such a way that it appeals to humans who, in the end, are your customers, is really important. Here we see on screen, a page title that's just basically a list of keywords, artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning, and it actually doesn't tell the viewer or the customer what this page is going to be about, really, apart from artificial intelligence. But as you know, there's a lot of things and subjects that could be surrounding this that you'd be better off filling your page titles with. Pretty self-explanatory. Give each page a unique title, really important to ensure that search engines and customers see each page as being unique on your website. Take advantage of your brand. This is pretty important. If you have a recognizable brand, then adding your brand to titles will help click-through rates in search, most definitely. Generally, it is recommended to add your brand at the end of the page title, but on certain pages such as your home page and about page, it may make sense to bring them towards the start. Write specifically for your customers. So in this example on screen, we often see on common pages like home or about, an about page, the page title may be about, but you really don't need to do it. You can make it very explanatory and help the customer understand what it's about. So in this particular example, I've written for the about page, a good example with a few keywords and the progress brand at the start. About progress, helping organizations build and deploy business critical applications. Of course, in the search engine result, we're not going to see that whole sentence, but at least it's filling. It looks nice, it leads the customer, and it also builds in some keywords as well. So how can we solve or assist people or content managers with page titles in Sitefinity? First of all, you can modify the Sitefinity page title length counter. I think it's about 70 out of the box. You can adjust it back to 60. We will have some documentation when we present these slides in the follow-up email for this webinar. So you can adjust that to about 60. It may help your content managers to keep that in mind if that's what they're looking for. You can also provide in Sitefinity contextual help for content managers. I've got a bit of a demonstration of this. We'll just jump into Sitefinity here. Hopefully my site hasn't spun down. So what we can do is, this is the Sitefinity backend under the pages area. Normally you'd look at page titles under title and properties, but we can actually provide a little bit more context here as well. If we jump down to labels and messages, this actually provides us with a lot of properties that we can actually adjust in the back-end interface of Sitefinity. And I know from just experience that the particular label we're looking for is the page title label. So we've got the default one says displayed in the title bar. We can adjust it and actually put a bit of a link to a bit more information for the user. So when they're there, they can get some context, a bit more information, and actually send them over to a page that's about writing good page titles. And you can do this for a lot of things in Sitefinity. So there, I've adjusted that. We can go back now under the pages area. If we go into home and actions, titles and properties like a content manager would, you'll see that we've got a bit more detailed explanation here, and we can actually click through to some information on the web about writing page titles, which can be very helpful. Obviously, if you've got a small team, that may be not too helpful. In a previous life, I had a team of about 30 content managers, so this sort of thing really helped me to keep these sorts of topics top of mind for the people in my team. It's often hard to keep reminding people about these sorts of things, and sometimes training doesn't help with buy-in sometimes, so these sort of contextual help can really be beneficial. Now, if you're a developer, you could implement an automated or a bit of automated formatting for the page title. So typically, a lot of experts sort of agree that an optimal format for page titles is, primary keywords first, secondary keywords obviously written in such a way that it makes sense and it's good and attractive for a customer or a visitor looking to come to your site, and then perhaps a pipe and then the brand name or the site name or something like that. So we want to provide consistent page titles for users. So the way we can automate that, we can't really automate the primary keywords or the secondary keywords part of the optimal format structure. We can automate the brand name. So in my global.ascx on the right hand side, what I'm doing on the page pre-render complete event handler is I'm actually going in, checking that this is not a back-end page. I'm grabbing the current site out of the multi-site context, and then I'm adjusting the page title just before render to include the brand name and a pipe, as well as the page title that the content manager has put in. So just a way to make that a little bit tidier. It's really little, I guess. It seems insignificant, but just those little tidy things can really help when you're doing content management a lot. All right, so poll time. If you're a site owner, give yourself a yes or a no based on how well you think you're covering the key points we just covered in page titles. If you're part of an agency, give yourself a yes or a no based on whether you think your current practice in your organization in regard to page title helps the end customer to meet the key points effectively.
Just waiting for a few more answers to come through. Okay, I think that looks like the majority of people there.
Okay, great.
Well,
it looks like we've got it.
There we go.
Cool, great. We've got an interesting mix there, Rosemary.
Yeah, it is.
So 40% say yes?
Yeah. Yep, and the majority are somewhat, so it's great to know.
Cool, thank you. So let's go on to faux pas number 2, and it's no image optimization. I actually see this quite a lot in the projects that I reviewed. Last year I was asked to do some analysis on a slow Sitefinity website for a well-recognized Australian brand. And this is actually their image analysis results. CMSs are huge applications, and it's virtually impossible to review documentation thoroughly. And many best practices when implementing a site on a CMS are usually learned through experience and trial and error. That's why it's really good if you're a end user of Sitefinity to engage an agency that's part of our partner channel, because they have the experience and the expertise from implementing many projects, can really help you in implementing the best site. This site was implemented, unfortunately, by an agency who had no previous experience, and there was actually quite a lot of critical implementation areas beyond this one, which the agency unfortunately had attributed to the CMS. We actually didn't get this resolved, and this is the news list page on this particular website, and as you can see, it's got about 8.4 megabyte of images, and they were wondering why their sites were performing slow. And it was not just the images, but this was certainly one that they didn't give enough time to really understand the end consequences of this particular lack of optimization. As you can see here on the right, it says that the images on that particular page could have potentially been reduced to about 0.5 megabyte. Now, why is this important? Well, of course, we all want fast and responsive website pages. Fast websites have more visitors who visit more pages for longer periods of time and who come back more often and are more likely to purchase products and click ads or do whatever you need them to do. Faster websites also make people happier, and happy users promote your website through linking and sharing. So there's a lot of consequences of having a slow performing website. The latest trends in web design and the proliferation of high resolution displays on mobile devices means that we're using more and more really large images at higher resolutions, and sometimes these can be 2 or 3 times their physical dimension on screen. So it's really important that we're actually optimizing images effectively so that we don't get bottlenecks and servers and things getting bogged down, particularly on high traffic sites. Often when a site is first launched, the initial images used at launch time have been optimized by the agency who work closely with the organization to develop the site. Okay, but shortly after, when content managers start to take over, and they adjust the news articles and do changes to the page, it often, if good image management practices haven't been enforced by the content management system implementation, I often see page load times starting to wane. Content managers shouldn't have to, in my opinion, worry about things like image sizes. And this actually can lead to the fourth point. Why is it important? Because it can start to impact your infrastructure. In the majority of websites or review suffering from performance issue, image optimization is often one of the contributing factors. Not all, but one of the contributing factors. Unfortunately, it's also, when it's often pointed out, it's often the real impact is overlooked. Larger files impact the web server, the network, and then the load placed on the database. Now, this issue escalates exponentially if the source image is above 500 kilobytes, because in the default implementation of Sitefinity, that is the point at where Sitefinity will no longer cache the image on the server and will actually request it down from the database every single time somebody visits the page. So apart from the size in my initial example of that customer who had 8.4 megabytes of images, the issue there was not just the time it took to serve that amount of images. The issue there was the files themselves were over the cache threshold, and so every single time somebody went to that page and saw those images, the database was being requested and the images was being pulled down from the database rather than existing in some sort of cache. So you can imagine in high traffic websites, this can actually start to create a bottleneck. So how can Sitefinity help us to resolve and help this particular issue? Fortunately, there's several things you can do in Sitefinity to avoid this issue and ensure that images are served optimized and appropriately sized for the task. First one is, if you're a developer or a site administrator, you can adjust the cache size that's set for the images, so it's approximately 500 kilobytes. This is the point at which Sitefinity will go out and store a copy of the image on the server rather than requesting it from the database. I probably recommend to keep it around 5 kilobytes unless your site is often serving large images above that threshold. My recommendation, though, would be to make other changes to your site to ensure that most images are being served underneath that particular threshold there. In my opinion, content management should be really easy for content managers, and they shouldn't have to worry about image sizes. They shouldn't have to upload all different sizes of an image, because in various places that same image is used in different sizes. So in this particular instance, we should really leverage the thumbnail system. The thumbnail system probably is a little bit inappropriately named. It's basically the system in Sitefinity that allows you to specify all the different sizes of images that the system can generate, so they can be served. So if you want one image that's served in a news detail page and a slightly smaller version of that image served in a list page where you've got the news, you can leverage the thumbnail system within Sitefinity to ensure you're getting the optimal size image for those particular situations. It's really important not to use the size param. So in Sitefinity, if you're a developer, you may have come across this particular parameter which you can use to specify the size of an image. Unfortunately, that size parameter doesn't respect the cache settings of Sitefinity. So unlike the thumbnail system, if you've got a large original image of, like, say, a couple of megabytes, and you're using the thumbnail system will respect the file size of the thumbnail as to whether it stores in the cache. The size parameter does not, and so it will, even though the resulting image may be smaller than that 500 kilobyte threshold, it will continually go and get the image out of the database if that image, the source image, is over that particular threshold. So great to use a thumbnail system. Stay away, in my opinion, from the size parameter. Keep in mind when using double density images, that's images where you're using on a mobile device where what you see on screen is only half or a third the size of the actual dimension of the image to give you those really crisp, high resolution images. You can actually afford to drop the quality a little bit on those because they're being compressed and resized on screen. You actually are increasing the pixels that are viewed, and so the quality of the original image can be slightly smaller, giving you a slightly more performant size of the original image. Use automated sizing in widget templates. So on your right here, I have an example from a template I've used for a news list. What I'm doing here is I've obviously cut out a lot of code here, but we have a image that's being reserved or served from the images field on the news item. I'm getting the image. I'm first checking whether there was one exists or whether the news item hasn't got an image. I'm getting the first one because that particular field could have multiple images assigned to it, and I'm using the resolve thumbnail URL method within Sitefinity to give me the image with the parameters that are set in the art1170W thumbnail size. So you can specify a name for the thumbnail size, and that's just requesting that particular size out of the system. So this is the best way to implement that in templates, and you can do this everywhere. By default, the image widget within Sitefinity uses this method to put an appropriate sized image that's been selected in the module. But obviously, if you're using it on blog posts or other modules, you should implement this for all images, in my opinion. Okay, and if you've got a large site, use CDNs or content delivery networks wherever possible. We'll also take that load off your server and give you a nice, snappy, performant pages. Okay, so a poll. Let's see who is currently optimizing images on their site automatically. Again, if you're a website owner, answer yes or no. If you're an agency, let us know whether you generally implement this in your projects.
That was a great summary, Seth. And the answers are still coming in. Okay, this is interesting. I'll share the results. And we have a split decision between yes and no as far as optimization is concerned with images.
Great. Oh, well, that's something perhaps teams can go back and talk about in their team and see whether anything can be done there. It does actually really affect the experience, so it's one that I often bring up. Okay, and especially for the content manager as well. I mean, I've been a content manager in a large team, and there's nothing like having to, sort out your images yourself. All right, so let's move on then to faux pas number 3, which is lack of social love, social meta tags in pages. So this is an interesting one. I've actually taken a screenshot for our own website, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So this is a screenshot of a blog post that we have on sitefinity.com. You'll see an image here that's being served in a bit of a description. But you actually can, if you've got sharing tools on your site or people are actually sharing your pages, a lot of times people are missing the actual social tags that can make this sharing experience and the content that's shared even better. So let's talk about social tags. So why are social tags important? So it allows you to optimize, obviously, for sharing, the sharing of content on social networks. On networks such as Twitter, Facebook, Google+, Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. And by defining exactly how titles and descriptions, images, and more appear in social streams. Studies show that the right metadata, including optimized media, such as images or videos, helps content to spread, which often leads to increased links and mentions. So if social is really important part of your strategy or digital strategy, or you think it should be, and it's something you've got to look in the future, this may be a really important thing to implement on your site. And I often see a lot of sites, especially a lot of corporations actually, that don't even do the base tags on key pages. So it's really one that people could probably do a lot more of. So what are social tags? Okay, so social tags are social network specific metadata in the head of a web page. Unless you're a developer, you won't be familiar with where this goes, but it's actually in the source of the HTML page. and it defines exactly what information is going to appear in the social streams. Knowing exactly which social meta tags to include can be really confusing. So if you see here, we've got a bit of a list of the key social networks and the content structures they actually support. So this can be actually confusing for webmasters probably, but for the rest of us, you know, there's a couple of simple things that we can do to overcome the majority of these issues. On the right, I've actually got a share on Pinterest, which has been specified as an article. So these content types that we're seeing on the left here actually control how the content is shared in the social stream. So this is an article format on Pinterest. If the content was specified as a recipe, as a Pinterest recipe, then when this was shared through to Pinterest, it would have a slightly different format than the article format. So if you've got social as really a big part of your strategy and you want to optimize content, you may want to look into each of these different content structures for the social networks and target specific content types in your actual website. Fortunately though, you don't have to include them all, and actually most of the social networks out there actually will fall back to the Facebook social tags and use them by default if you're not specifying, say, the Twitter specific tags as well. So you can just implement a smaller set and can be quite effective, but if you obviously want to target, say, Pinterest or certain demographics, you may want to look at which ones would help you in that particular demographic. So how can we solve this in Sitefinity? Well, first of all, sometimes you'll want to write specific content, maybe a specific title or a specific description for a social network, so that you just not using the page description or the page title. And you can actually add custom fields to contain your data within Sitefinity. So if you have the need to do that, you may want to add maybe a social share image field, custom field to Sitefinity, perhaps a description title that allow you to really specifically write for those that social medium. So that would be the first thing you do. The next thing you can do is actually in Sitefinity 10.2, which is coming out in November, the Facebook Open Graph, which is their specification for social tags protocol, will be supported out of the box with Sitefinity 10.2. So that is coming out in November. You might want to consider putting some budget aside to actually implement this. You'll just be required to upgrade, but obviously it would be timely to go through and add the social data to your content. So it's something you might want to look at and consider. It's coming up. It's a good time to look at this particular one. So the next step, I guess, is probably to register to attend our next session, turning Sitefinity into a social powerhouse, where I'm going to actually do a demonstration of the implementation in 10.2. I'm also going to go into look at other things we could do from a social perspective within Sitefinity, but I will be demonstrating this. And so if you'd like to find out a bit more about this topic, I'd really recommend that you sign up there and we'll delve into this in depth. So let's take another poll now. If you're an owner, let's see whether you're currently implementing any sort of social tags. And if you're an agency, is this something that you regularly discuss or regularly implement for customers by default? I'd be really interested to see what's happening there in this area.
So the votes are still coming in, and I'll just give it one more second. Okay, that looks like the majority of people, I think. So looks like 53% is the sort of the larger majority of somewhat socially savvy websites out there that people have implemented so far. Hopefully some of those insights that you just went through help them out a bit more. Obviously, if there's further questions, raise those questions so we can answer them at the end of the webinar here.
Yeah, well, that's certainly an interesting result for our release of 10.2 in November. So hopefully you'll sign up and we'll show you how exactly that's going to work in the next release. All right, FOPO number 4 is general optimization. Now, this is a very developer-centric faux pas. So if you're a marketer or a content manager, you're not really interested in coding, you may want to take a little bit of a break right now, or perhaps you could get out your notebook and you could take some notes and sort of hit up your own development team to make sure that they've done these. So, general optimization. This is pretty much quite a large topic, and I'll have some links which we'll send through in this presentation at the end of the webinar that will certainly help you, because there's some great resources on sitefinity.com as to what to do here. I just got highlighted in this web page speed report the first byte time. Now, often I'll do, if I've got a slow performing website, first thing I'll do is go and have a look at the first byte time, because that will often indicate to me that if there's a consistently high first byte time, that's a really good indicator that something is wrong within the website. Ideally, what we should be aiming for is probably something under about 500 milliseconds. So there's lots of things that can affect that, but certainly trying to get that below the 500 millisecond mark is really probably what you want to target. You'll notice in this particular report, we've got a big fat red F for first byte time, indicating that we need to do something about that. This is a really good report that I often run, just to give me a brief overview of the pages, and there's lots of other reports available online that will do this sort of thing. So let's have a look at why optimization is important. Of course, no one likes an unresponsive website. We've mentioned this for one of the other topics. So, you know, a fast website is obviously a target, and when I actually worked developing websites with my own agency, it was often, you know, something that people brought up, whether their site was fast enough or not. So it is really important to get that speed up, and optimization is certainly one of the ways in which you can do that. Of course, studies show that slow websites lose users, so that's a really important reason to delve into the general optimization topic. And this is a small risk, but sometimes some people say that search engines are actually known to penalize slow websites. Like I said, that's a small risk, but it is mentioned a few places, so it might be a reason why you need to look at optimization. How can we solve this in Sitefinity? And this is where we're going to make some people lose some people, and they're going to get glassy-eyed. But we have got a faux pas number 5, which is coming up, so that will get out a bit more out of the developer topic. But of course, if you're a developer, you should have tracing and debugging off, of course, which should be a no-brainer for you. This one might be a little bit interesting in your global.ascx. If you've generated that for your project when you're in development, you need to have no empty methods in that. So the template that creates the global.ascx when you first create one in Visual Studio actually creates several empty methods there, and if you haven't got them, if you don't remove the empty ones or haven't commented them out, you will have some issues with extra session states being generated, which can actually slow down the Sitefinity site. So it's a good one. It is mentioned in the documentation, easily missed, so just keep that one in mind. In the web config, number of recompiles before app restart should be around the 2000 mark. If you're in version, I think 10 or above, that will probably be 2000 already. So if you started a new project, you should be right. But if you're upgrading an earlier version, or you've been through a few upgrades before version 10, this was set about 50. So it is one to look out for. You may want to change that up. Basically what this does is after recompilation, count, and if it equals that particular parameter, the site will do a restart. Now, you might think that's not a big issue, but if you're publishing pages, etc., that is actually causes a recompile. So if you've got a large site and you say you do a menu item change and you've got 100 pages, you'll hit that 50 mark really quickly. So bumping it up to 2000 will stop unnecessary restarts and then the resulting slow performance while the application does the restart. so it is an important one. Another one is to configure IIS to recycle at a set time convenient to users. I usually change this up and set it for early in the morning or something like that, depending of course on the traffic patterns of that particular website. But you don't want the app recycling in the middle of the day when you've got a high volume of users on. So I'll configure that usually at a convenient time, or modify the settings that really work for this particular client we're looking at. Next one is ensure output cache is always on. People who've been around a while has heard me mention this quite a few times, but I do see it turned off a fair bit, particularly in instances where you may have a user, or maybe you want user-specific information on page, such as, you know, maybe some profile properties, the username or an email, and so you've turned it off so that you don't get caching of users' details on the page. Now, in my view, you really should code around that, and the best way to do that is to bring those unique properties, unique per user properties, onto the page using a web service or something like that, and leaving the page cache on. So just always try and code around turning that output cache off as a first resort, and only turn it off on a per page basis as a last resort if you can't code your way around it. Ensure you have a long output cache profile. 24 hours was what I usually set. There's no real reason to have much less than that. There may be a couple of specific situations where you would want that less. I think it's set by default in Sitefinity to about 2 minutes, so bumping it up to 24 hours will really make sure your pages don't need to be refreshed every few minutes. Below 10.0, you need to set the vary by user agent to false. So previously, Sitefinity would create a separate cache of the page based upon the device and the browser being used. So you have this situation where various versions of the page would exist in memory, because you'd have browsers with different versions of devices and different browsers, etc. So setting that to false made sure that you didn't get this situation and have slow performing pages. Below 10, we've set that by to false by default. So if you've started a project recently, you may not need to worry about this now, but if it's, you know, upgraded, you will need to change that. Consider the optimal setting for the vary by param setting. Again, this is related to the cache. What happens here is if you have a customer or if you're sending out a lot of newsletters and things like that, you'll often use UTM parameters of Google tracking in an email campaign, and that'll send out, when people click on links, they'll actually get a unique UTM parameter for that user. What that can do often is, when Sitefinity gets a new parameter, it'll actually create a new version of the page for that particular parameter. And if you've got a high volume of users coming from newsletters with all different parameters, settings, then you can really slow down your website while Sitefinity tries to cope with creating separate page views for those particular parameters. So setting that to an optimal setting, you really need to experiment into that and do some research. But that's a good one to look at. And then finally, wait for the output cache to fill, should be set to true, also in that cache output settings. So that just makes sure that people who are looking at the same page while the page is being compiled won't create a new version of the compilation, basically. Finally, if you've got performance issues, what I really recommend is to use the diagnostic reports available since version 9 to really identify the trouble spots. I've done a webinar on this before. I think it was the last webinar we did on 10.0 where we looked at the diagnostic reports, but it really is an easy way to go through and review pages, and the reports will actually break down the pages to widgets and show you database query times, compilation times, etc., for individual widgets. So that'll really help you to identify those trouble spots. And if you've got performance issue, this is probably the first place I would start to identify, you know, how you could resolve the issues you may have. All right, so new poll time. I guess I want to know, this might be hard for some people to know whether their site has been optimized correctly, but if you do know, indicate a yes or a no. You know, if you're an agency and listening to this call, it would be interesting to find out in your yes or no whether or not, you know, looking at optimizations and implementing the recommendations is a normal part of your pre-launch settings that you do, or pre-launch procedures.
Great, that was a great summary of you know, general optimization there, Seth. Thank you for sharing all of those insights. We do have the answers. I'll share them now.
Great. So it looks like about 36%, Rosemary?
Yeah, a split between yes and don't know.
Yeah, okay. Great. All right, well, that might be something you can review. And we're going to move on to the final faux pas now. So let's have a look at that. Faux pas number 5. Actually pretty important as well, like page titles in my opinion, poorly configured error pages. And this is actually a sample from a Sitefinity site that I reviewed not long ago. And this was the error page they had configured, which is of course the default error page. Again, the URL is blanked out to protect people. But in my opinion, this is one or a topic that's really often left out or not done sufficiently enough. And let's have a bit of a look why. So why are error pages so important? So an error page informs, one of the roles of an error page is to inform search engines to remove deleted pages from the index. And it does this when it sends the status code through in the page header. So sometimes if you don't configure Sitefinity correctly, Sitefinity could actually be not sending a status code of OK rather than a status code of page not found, things like that. So setting up error pages in Sitefinity is really important for search engine optimization and making sure pages are appropriately removed from the index. It also provides a massive opportunity in my view to engage lost visitors. And why is that? Well, say somebody's coming from another site, they've linked to your page or your website, or coming from a search engine, and you know that article that you had on the website is long gone. What they'll happen is they'll come across, of course, an error page, and if they've come across an error page like we just had as a sample, they've got nowhere to go. Oftentimes, they're going to not browse your site then to look for the content. They're going to straight away just click the back button and go back to where they come from, and perhaps look for the content elsewhere. So it's really important actually to use error pages to engage people, to ensure you don't lose that particular visitor. And don't forget, error pages are not just for page not found, they're also for application errors as well, which occasionally happens with any sort of development project. Finally, I think, you know, this can, you know, be one of the things that make or break your professional image, especially if you're, you know, a corporation with a, you know, high value image, and you come across, people come across things like this, so it just doesn't look like you've done a lot of work, or you've, you know, just made some shortcuts. You know, it's just one of those things that can also, you know, tarnish your brand or your image a little bit, and you may or not want to do that. So how can we make a good error page? First of all, provide the correct status code if you're a developer in the response headers. That's really important. So looking at the Sitefinity documentation, doing the steps is really important, and setting that up before go live. Next, if you're a content manager or somebody who's writing content, it's really important to convince a user to keep browsing. So often you can write, you know, you can have a standard page there where you write some information, and I guess it's your job then to convince them to keep browsing and hopefully point them in the right direction or get them back on track is part of a good error page. And if acknowledging that there has been an error, something good to do, just maybe apologize that it's a broken link or something like that, is also part of a good error page as well. And finally, supplying the user with sufficient detail about what's happened and access to navigation. One of the big things about the initial error page that I showed you as part of the title for this faux pas is the fact that that person who's come across that page can't actually navigate anywhere else unless they go to the address bar in the browser and type in a URL or go to the base homepage via the URL bar. That's not a great experience for users. And so in any error page, they should be able to access the navigation. Maybe you might want to include a link there prominently in the content to home, or maybe provide a link to the search. I've seen some good error pages that actually have a search facility from that particular point of view. And I've also seen ones that use the actual page that generated the error to bring back some search results that may lead the person to the correct page. So there's a number of things you can do there, but access to navigation is really, really important in my opinion. Okay, so how can we do this in Sitefinity? First of all, we need to configure custom errors in the web config. The documentation on sitefinity.com under the docs area is really good there and really thorough. There is a few things you need to take in consideration. You can't just do the custom errors. You have to do a couple other steps as well, so it's really important to do that. You need to create a widget if you're a developer that changes the response status of a page. If you're going to use a Sitefinity-based page as the error page, you need to have a widget on the page that's changing the response code to 404 or 500 or whatever the error that you're handling is. Content managers create a really compelling content that can meet the objectives that we just went through in Sitefinity. So they're the three major steps, and that is the documentation or the link to the documentation on sitefinity.com right there. All right, so I think we'll perform a little bit better this time. So in the poll, has your website got properly configured error pages? If you don't know, there's an easy way you can test. Just go to your homepage, your website, and type in a fake page. And you'll get taken to an error page, and then you can decide how to answer the question based on that.
Great. I love the tips there on access to navigation and using it as a point to definitely engage lost visitors and things like that, and make sure that they stay browsing on your site so you don't lose them. So the results are in. And we have a 69%, of error pages properly configured, which is a great number. Yeah.
Yep, that's probably our best result so far.
Yeah, and definitely some points in there that if people hadn't thought about, hopefully they can take away.
Good. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our presentation now, but I just wanted to review the 5 faux pas that we've been through. Okay, number 1, neglected page titles. Don't forget you could implement contextual help and some simple automation rules to make this a little bit of better experience for content managers. If you have actually neglected it in the past, I encourage you to go away and maybe that's something you can look at as part of your marketing strategy. Also look at page descriptions there as well. It would be a good sub point to that as well. No image optimization was number 2, and we said to optimize and resize images automatically using the thumbnail system. Hopefully content managers will love you if you're a developer, if you do that well, and your pages will be much snappier. Lack of social love. You might remember we talked about social meta tags. This is coming out in 10.2, and we're covering it in the next Lunch and Learn series in 2 weeks' time. So this may be something that you might be able to do or look to do towards the end of the year during your Christmas downtime. General optimization. So squeezing those extra seconds out of Sitefinity is really important. This should be part of your go-live procedure if you're an agency. And I would encourage you to leverage the documentation and the diagnostics module within Sitefinity itself to ensure you've got the general optimization best practices done. And finally, faux pas number 5 we've just covered was poorly configured error pages. So make sure you set up these and get creative if you're a content editor. And remember, what you're trying to do here is recover potentially lost visitors. So really important there. Now, finally, I just wanted to say, if you're an agency, sometimes some of these things that I've just covered off today, and many more, are simply too hard to cover in most project budgets or, with the time we have. And one thing I've seen one agency do is actually put some of these into a an extra luxury item cell. So they'll go and they'll submit the project and the costings for a project, and then they'll put some of these extra little luxury items as part of an extras package that the customer can add on to their standard project. Just an extra way, I guess, that you can perhaps get some extra revenue, or also offer up your customer just those features that may be left out of the opposition's project as well. So certainly some opportunities there to leverage what we've gone through today and some of the other things that I'm sure you've come up with before, and sell, I guess, the extra touches. So that brings us to the end of the webinar, and we've got some time now for questions. I'll hand it over to you, Rosemary.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. We've had just a few questions come in through the question panel, but I'll just take this time to just remind people that if you do have some questions, now's the time to submit them just in the question box in the panel to the right of your screen. We do have time for only a few, but I do suggest that you ask them, and we'll definitely get back to you individually after the webinar concludes if we don't get a chance to answer them in the next few minutes. So. Okay, so here's a question. Where do we start if we have a performance issue with our website? Seth?
Okay, that's a good question. I think we covered that just a little bit, but I think probably generally I would look to the diagnostics module to bring back. It'll give you actually a list of all the general performance tips at the start of the diagnostics module, and then you can delve into individual reports which will actually break down where there may be some more performance issues. So yeah, that was probably where I would start to overcome, or start off with some general optimization.
Okay, great. Here's another one around the social meta tags. So you mentioned social meta tags will be available in the upcoming Sitefinity 10.2 release. When was that going to be released again?
So yeah, mid-November we're aiming to release Sitefinity 10.2, so look out for that. We'll certainly, if you're a Sitefinity customer or an agency, we'll certainly be having promotional emails sent out to announce the release of that, but it looks to be about mid-November at this point. Okay,
great. Seth, do you have any tips on troubleshooting the time to first byte? Is this indicative of server configuration, for example? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so it's a hard one to cover. Generally, sometimes the time to first byte can indicate not most of the time it doesn't indicate actual lack of server resources, but sometimes it does, and maybe you don't have enough RAM or CPU for your particular size website. I don't actually come across that problem very often. Usually it's some sort of setting that hasn't been enabled, output cache turned off. So probably, again, I go back to the diagnostics module, go through the checklist that it has there, and then start seeing your HTTP requests report and see if you can find some pages that are taking longer than others, and then delve into each of the individual widgets and see whether there's one particular widget that's taking a long time. So often you'll find if there's a few pages that are causing most of the problem, often you'll find there's maybe a database query that's not real optimal or things like that. So there's a number of things you do, but definitely look at things like the diagnostics module to start with.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answered the question. Here's another one. So you mentioned leveraging the thumbnail system for sizing and optimizing images. Are there any what are the options if we find the current thumbnail generation too limited for our purposes?
Yeah, okay, so in Sitefinity, like most things, that part of the content management system is quite extensible. So we have a number of pre-configured sizing rules that you can use. And one is resize to area and the other one is crop to area. But it is extensible. So if you want to implement your own, perhaps you've got a tool set that you use pretty regularly in projects and you want to use the optimization capabilities of that particular tool set, you can actually create your own custom profiles and extend that out. And we have got a number of examples in the documentation, and one Sitefinity engineer has actually done a sample code on GitHub, which I can send through in the resources, in the links along with this presentation.
Okay, great. Any more questions from other people? We're probably wrapping up time here, actually. Dean will come back to you offline and respond to yours after this, and a few others as well. So just finally, I'd just like to say thank you very much for sharing your time and obviously your expert knowledge of what you know and what you could, all of your tips and tricks that people could take away with them. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on today's webinar. Hopefully we've given you key insights on what you can instantly do to improve across your website. Moving forward, at this same time in 2 weeks on October 18th, just a reminder, we will be covering off part 2 of the webinar series, and the topic of focus for that session will be how to turn Sitefinity into a social powerhouse. This session will give you a first look at the social enhancements that become available in the upcoming release of 10.2. You'll also glean some useful ideas to enhance the social savviness of your website, and we'll also show you more about integrating a social platform into Sitefinity. And finally, just today's recording will be available within the next few days on our website, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording after the event. But I'd like to thank you all for joining, and hopefully we've made the most of your hour and kept it insightful for you. So thanks again, and have a great day.